What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a great day. Thanks for clicking the video. This is Dan, here to give you another quick coverage of Ukraine and Russia. What's going on over there, what's happening, who's escalating, what's actually going on. Going to show you a few people talking about it who know much more than I do. Going to show you a few videos of the ballistics, the missiles, the gunfire, the craziness, destruction that's going on. And if we don't wrap this up, it's going to escalate to a point there's no coming back, and we'll be full-blown World War III. I know that sounds crazy, sounds far-fetched, sounds like that's not going to happen in the world we live in. But Ukraine and Russia have been escalating each other for a few years now, and the U.S. is getting involved, and we are giving Ukraine our weapons. The U.S. is not only giving them weapons, we are assisting them in firing their weapons. And if you ask me, that's just as bad as us doing it ourselves. If we fired a missile from here to Russia, there's no difference than if we put missiles on a truck, send them to Ukraine, then fire them from there. It doesn't really fucking matter. We are not only funding, but we are actually helping them use the technology to shoot these missiles. Ukraine does not have a nuclear force or a tactical missile force like we do here in the United States. And unless NATO steps in and assists and governs Ukraine in the attack of Russia, they are incapable of doing so on their own. And Putin and Russia has to see the United States' immediate involvement as no other than joining up against them. How else are they supposed to see it? Like, it doesn't mean that you're out here doing propaganda for Russia if you think it's fucked up what the U.S. is doing, especially when we're about to turn office over. Donald Trump's about to take over, and it's just kind of known that when one presidency is over, you just kind of fucking tread water until the other president takes over. You don't start nuclear war. You don't start World War III. You don't do all the shit they're doing to make sure that Donald Trump takes over the craziest presidency term there's ever been in the U.S. The world's in grave danger. There's people like me who feel it in the pit of their stomach, and they've been feeling it build and build and build. Making these videos is just one way of trying to educate the average citizen here in the U.S., which has no idea what's fucking going on in the world. They have no idea from what's in our food, to mind control tricks, to taxes to make us poor, to what's really going on at the border. Potential weapons being used against American citizens here. There's so much going on. A lot of it sounds like conspiracy, but that's just a word they used to make educated people sound crazy. We're gonna show you a video from Tucker Carlson. I'm gonna show you another one from Peak Prosperity. Show you these because they're much bigger channels and they have much more time and much more resources to really do in-depth news coverages, talk to people who may be in the actual rooms, have some intel from people who are there, and both sides. When you're talking about Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, these people have a lot of reach. They are wealthy and they are smart. So I'm going to let them do some of the news reporting. We're going to watch it. We're going to react. And as always, everybody, what can you do? You can get in shape. You can educate yourself. You can eat right. You're not going to be able to do anything if you're not healthy. Get your health in check. Hit the gym, run, all those things that are tedious and ultimately lead to you being a better person. So thank you so much for clicking the video. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you and your family have an awesome time. Be safe. Eat too much turkey, watch some American football, forget about politics for one day. I'm going to really try to shut my brain off tomorrow and enjoy my family. They have the school off, no school. Thursday as well. Just going to literally just try to indulge in family time, rest my brain, recoup, play some sports, watch some football, maybe watch a couple movies, play some football, get outside. Maybe I'll bring them hunting. Really just take a couple days to heal myself, heal my brain, heal my body, and then we'll get back to it. So here's some Tucker Carlson, Peak Prosperity, Joe Rogan, kind of breaking down what's going on in the world right now. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Один. Пункт.
Next administration with the world war, with the nuclear conflict. But I think we're watching the most evil thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is the lame duck administration leaving the next administration with the world war, with the nuclear conflict, by allowing Ukraine, a proxy state of the United States, to strike within Russia. And I'll just have one editorial comment and then I'm just going to let you go. But I think that people in Washington misunderstand Vladimir Putin and they think he's a monarch with absolute power, which is not true. And Russian politics is complex and it's lively. And Putin is very concerned with his approval rating within Russia. He cannot appear weak. That's a huge threat to him. He feels that. I can confirm. And if he can't hide attacks on him by the United States through Ukraine, either on Moscow or big civilian casualties, I think he will have no choice, in his view, but to launch like a serious response against Ukraine or NATO countries or possibly the United States. So this seems like the most reckless thing that's ever happened in my life.
I hardly have words for it. Let me just.
Am I overstating it? Do you think?
No, not even remotely. So let me just say specifically what has been authorized.
Yes.
This is something that some NATO countries, including the United Kingdom, have been pressuring the Biden administration to do for quite a long time, for at least a year. But going all the way back to the beginning of 2022, this was an option that they had, which was we have these guided missiles called ATACMS, which are very powerful for attacking inside Russia. You can guide them specifically and very precisely to where you want them to go. Obviously, you have to get intelligence about where you want to strike. And the reason we never permitted the Ukrainians to use them is because the Ukrainians can't use those missiles on their own. In other words, if they want to launch these missiles, it's not just the U.S. giving them the missiles and then telling them no problem, go and use them. It requires the direct involvement of the United States and or a major NATO country like France or the UK or Germany, because the Ukrainians don't have the guiding capability in order to know how to launch these missiles.
Right.
So this is not just us giving them missiles and saying, go attack deep inside Russia. Imagine if some major country, China, Iran, Russia, whoever, gave missiles to Canada if we were at war with them, or Mexico or Cuba, and said, we're giving you these specifically for you to use them inside the United States. We would consider that a grievous act of war, not just on the part of the country shooting them, but on the part of the country giving them. What Biden did here is so much worse. He didn't just give Ukrainians missiles and say, feel free to use them inside Russia. We are going to participate in the bombing of Russia, NATO and or the United States, because there's no way the Ukrainians can launch these missiles on their own, which means we are now, our military, our intelligence community, are participating in missile attacks inside the country of Russia. This is something that even the Biden administration, for all their hawkishness on Russia and Ukraine, feeding that war, fueling it, preventing diplomatic resolutions because they wanted this war, even they were unwilling to do it because they understood the dangers of the escalatory risks. For Joe Biden, or whoever's acting in his name, to do this just 2 weeks after the country resoundingly rejected governance by the Democratic Party in the administration, and on his way out as an 81-year-old man, knowing that he has about 6 weeks left in office, to just say, I know that these are massive risks, but I'm willing to take them. I'm 81. I don't really care. And then to make it so much more difficult for the following administration to do what they promised to do during the campaign, which the American people voted for and wanted, which is to resolve this war. Instead, we're risking escalation with the world's largest superpower, nuclear power. Over what? Over what?
Well, I mean, placed in context too, this is without precedent. And I think it's Blinken. I want to ask about that in a second. But so 1956, Soviets invade Hungary and murder a ton of people. 61, they put nuclear weapons in Cuba. 68, they invade Czechoslovakia, murder a bunch of people once again. These are all, incredibly provocative acts, far more provocative than invading Eastern Ukraine. And this was the middle of the Cold War, and no American president, it was Democrats and Republicans in charge during those periods, they didn't respond by attacking Russia. I mean, there's nothing like this has ever happened. No one's ever been this crazy.
Well, this is, my big breach with the left, my big permanent split with whatever they thought I was in terms of association with them.
Too, they hate you.
Oh, yeah, I know. And that all happened in 2016 when out of nowhere Russiagate appeared. And I remember like it was yesterday, the very first ad from Hillary Clinton's campaign with this like menacing baritone voice. What does Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump have in common? What does Russia have on Donald Trump? And journalistically, I just couldn't believe it because it was so redolent of McCarthyism, which is a civil libertarianism I was taught was like one of the worst civil liberties of the 20th century.
And by the way, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, you go around just accusing people of being Russian agents with no evidence, destroying their reputation, their lives, kind of like what they're trying to do to Tulsi Gabbard now, what they tried to do for Donald Trump for the last 8 years. So just on that ground, I was kind of offended by it. Journalistically, I was so skeptical of it because when you have intelligence agencies leaking anonymously unverified claims to the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they put it on the front page and gather Pulitzers for them, that's usually a sign that a huge disinformation campaign of deceit is underway. That was the exact method used, for example, to sell the war on Iraq to the American people, was that kind of process. That's why these intelligence agencies need to be rooted out. But what alarmed me most was that the climate was deliberately created in Washington, especially once Hillary lost and they blamed Russia for it, that any communications with Russia, anyone who visits Russia, anyone who talks to a Russian official is automatically deemed sinister or treasonous. And as you said, during the Cold War, which dominated our American life for 50 years, Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire. They were infinitely more powerful, more threatening, more everything than Russia is now. We always communicated with Soviet leaders. There were phones all over Washington that rang to the counterparts. They communicated constantly. After Russiagate, there's basically no communication any longer between the Russian leaders and the American leaders.
On either side. And I should just say,
not because Russia wanted that. That was something that in Washington got created because they blamed Russia and claimed that Russia was our existential enemy because of the claim that they interfered in the 2016 election. Before that, there was the Obama administration and the Putin government cooperated in all sorts of ways around the world.
Of course. But it's the leadership of the Republican Party too. I had a conversation with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and he was about to appropriate tens of billions more for Ukraine. And I said, well, why don't you check with Putin? You're the Speaker of the House, you're number 3 in line for the presidency. Well, what? I said, well, I'll see if I can facilitate that. I'll call the press office, kind of set you up. Why don't you talk to Putin? No, absolutely not. Will not. Why?
Imagine if he had, though, and that leaked.
But
I'm not excusing him.
Why wouldn't he just say, I'm not attacking Mike Johnson. I guess I am attacking Mike Johnson. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just reporting what actually happened. I said, don't you have a moral duty to get as much information about this war before you fund its continuation and the killing of all these people? Like, shouldn't you know more? No.
I think it is important to say that this war has been 100% bipartisan, although the Biden administration, as the leader of the executive branch, is primarily responsible. There's been about, I would say, 5 or 6 dozen anti-interventionist Republicans, typically more Trump supporters, both in the House and Senate, who have spoken out from the beginning against funding this war. But the vast majority of Republicans, to the extent they have a criticism or had a criticism of the Biden administration at all with respect to Ukraine, it was that they didn't do enough. They didn't spend enough money on Ukraine. They didn't give Ukraine enough weapons. They didn't get more involved, more heavily, and earlier than they should. But, the thing that you said about encouraging Mike Johnson to speak to Putin, which of course, as the third in line to the presidency, as you said, when they're proposing to escalate a major war, of course you should want to understand the Russian perspective. This is what Tulsi Gabbard did in 2017 when she was a member of Congress and the Obama administration had unleashed this $1 billion a year CIA dirty war to change the government of Syria, to dislodge Bashar al-Assad from the government, and we fought along ISIS and al-Qaeda, who also wanted Assad gone. We were told those were our existential enemies for 15 years. We fought alongside them to do it. And so many of the weapons we sent ended up in the hands of al-Qaeda and ISIS and other Islamic radical groups in Syria. And Tulsi Gabbard, as a member of the military, but also as a member of Congress with constitutional responsibility to authorize or disauthorize a war, wanted to go to Syria and see what was happening for herself. And then she spoke with Syrian officials and got an opportunity to speak with the Syrian president. And based solely on that, she's now accused of being a Russian agent, being some sort of, treasonous.
All right, rejoining the channel is two-time Moochie Award-winning and kind of on track to win his third Moochie at this point, I'll say, not to get ahead of the data that we will aggregate at the end of the year, our good friend, Professor Justin Brunk. So, Justin, it's been a few weeks since we've done a Ukraine update, and there have been some developments that seriously mandate this discussion. So let me go through the high points and then get your assessment of what's going on. Starting on November 17th, President Joe Biden authorized Ukraine to use U.S. supplied missiles, basically ATACMS, to strike deeper inside Russia, easing limitations on the longer range weapons. The first use of ATACMS against Russia was on November 19th, when Ukraine fired 6 ATACMS at Russia's Bryansk region. And then following that attack, Russian President Vladimir Putin made an announcement that he was lowering the threshold for Russia's use of nuclear weapons. Specifically, he's changing the doctrine that previously said that Russia may use nuclear weapons in case of a nuclear attack by an enemy or a conventional attack that threatened the existence of the state, to one that says that Russia can consider a nuclear strike in response to a conventional attack on Russia or its ally, Belarus, that, quote, created a critical threat to their sovereignty and or their territorial integrity, end quote. So on November 21st, in what was maybe a warning of their willingness to use nuclear weapons, an IRBM, not an ICBM, so an intermediate range ballistic missile, not an intercontinental ballistic missile, was fired at the Ukrainian city of Dnipro from 500 miles away in Russia. The missile used is reportedly one based on the design of the RS-26 Rubez. Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh briefed reporters that the U.S. government had been notified about the launch beforehand through nuclear risk reduction channels. And during a Russian briefing, spokesperson Marina Zakharova got a mysterious phone call that was picked up by her microphone, where a male voice on the other end of the line instructed her not to refer to a quote-unquote ballistic missile. So, Justin, what do we think about all of these developments?
Clearly, there's a strong game of positioning, both in terms of deterrence posture and also positioning for what promises to be at least some attempt at a new negotiation for some sort of solution in terms of a ceasefire once the Trump administration takes over in January. And as part of that, we've seen the Biden administration very belatedly authorize a series of aid measures, but also permissions, particularly, as you said, the ATACMS authorization for use of that weapon against military targets that are being used to strike Ukraine that are inside Russian territory, which had previously been limited to occupied parts of Ukraine like Crimea. Clearly trying to, on the administration's point of view, provide the Ukrainians with sort of symbolic bargaining chips, in effect, of allowing them to do more things that the Russians have a strong incentive to try and stop quickly, which therefore could be essentially traded as part of any kind of negotiated settlement or the attempt at one. On the other side, you're seeing Russia clearly feeling that it needs to respond with these changes to nuclear declaratory policy and the combat use of the RS-26 derived IRBM against Dnipro. Both of those pretty unsubtle signals. I would say, I wouldn't set too much stock, frankly, on declaratory changes to Russian nuclear posture, because the reality has always been that whenever President Putin and his kind of inner circle of Siloviki who rule Russia feel they are justified in terms of using nuclear weapons or feel they have to, they will use those. They might do some emergency legal change simultaneously because Russians policymakers do tend to actually change the law as they do things to make sure that it's legal according to the Russian internal legal system whenever they do stuff, which is an interesting mindset detail. But ultimately, if Putin decides he needs to use nuclear weapons, he's going to order that regardless of what their doctrine says. So I think we sometimes put a little bit too much emphasis on trying to examine the minutiae of subtle details or implications in published doctrine there. The RS-26 derived IRBM use, I think, is a much more direct signal, and it has a few different layers to it. Firstly, unlike, I've seen a bit of reporting around where people saying this is the first time Russia's used a nuclear-capable missile. It's a huge signal. It's not the first time Russia's used a nuclear-capable missile. Russia's used thousands of KH-101, so Kodiak, air-launched cruise missiles, of which the KH-102 variant is just the one with the nuclear warhead, but otherwise it's pretty much the same missile. Equally, their Iskander K-launched 9M723 ballistic missiles, which they use all the time, are capable of taking a nuclear warhead, and the 9M728, which is the cruise missile launched from the Iskander K ground launcher, can also take its own nuclear warhead. That's actually one of the things that was supposedly up front on the accusations of Russia having violated the INF Treaty, was the cruise missile variant on the Iskander K launcher. So Russia's used a lot of nuclear-capable missiles. The difference with the RS-26 here is that this is an exclusively nuclear-capable system so far. Now, clearly, they put essentially dummy warheads on the system. So what we appear to have seen is 4 to 6 MIRVs, so multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, with each one having submunition clusters, which were probably decoys or some other adapted decoys to essentially serve as submunitions. But this is fundamentally a nuclear delivery system that does not have a credible conventional role. And you saw with the impacts in Dnipro, it's very sort of visually spectacular, I suppose, is the one way of saying it. But very, very striking. These shafts of light coming down in these multiple clusters, which anybody who knows a bit about nuclear stability and strategic signaling knows that is what the end would look like were we all to go to thermonuclear war. It would be these hypersonic re-entering multiple independent re-entry vehicles coming in with nuclear warheads. But those submunitions are not accurate enough to be a credible conventional strike system against military targets. And so, because for a nuclear weapon, you don't have to be that accurate. So the system isn't spec'd for that. And so it really is a sort of almost purely demonstrative capability at this point. Hence, its particularly targeted use as a signal to say, look, this is we're trying to underline the nuclear threats being made over the use of conventional missiles against Russian targets by Ukrainian forces as a sort of different level of threat compared to the now really worn out Russian nuclear saber rattling, where every time a new system is discussed for supply to Ukraine, they say this is a red line, and they make either veiled or explicit nuclear threats, and then the system is supplied and nothing happens. So I guess they determined that they had to do another thing. The other thing to note is that a lot of Europe, in terms of particularly Western European countries, are out of range of most practical range of Russia's conventional ballistic systems. So Iskander and even Kinjal, because the air-launched ballistic missile, because the launch aircraft would have to fly so far around essentially Finland, Sweden, Norway, down through the Iceland-GI-UK gap to actually fire at targets in Western Europe with that Kinjal, that it's not really a credible threat. And so this is also potentially a signal aimed at Western European governments who, face a cruise missile and a sabotage threat, but otherwise are outside the practical reach of a lot of Russia's long-range precision strike capabilities, to say, oh, and by the way, here's the specter of intermediate-range ballistic missile development in the conventional realm again, which hasn't been a thing really since the IRBM treaty, although it is a thing in the Indo-Pacific where China has lots of IRBMs with conventional capabilities. So, in some ways, this may signal Russian recommitment to development of systems of conventional systems in that category, which would increase the long-range conventional threat to Western European countries that are outside the range of its current ballistic missiles. Because cruise missiles can absolutely reach lots of Western European targets, but at least with cruise missiles, you have a lot more options for defense. They're not perfect and they're expensive and difficult, but there are a lot more systems that can play in that air defense game.
You mentioned the MIRVs, and we see pictures of some of the damage on the ground. So just to be very clear, those MIRVs were inert, and the damage we see on the ground is indiscriminate and just a result of a solid object hitting it.
Yeah, at about Mach 11. In some cases, I don't know whether that's the terminal velocity in terms.
So those missiles came in at Mach 11. It's so fast that there's no chance to shoot them down. There's really no defense mechanisms for anything like that. Potentially, you get lucky, maybe you knock a couple down, but there were 6 incoming strikes of 6 at Mach 11. Thank God these ones were not nuclear equipped. I don't even think they had really any type of explosive charge. This was Putin flexing his fucking muscle and showing us what he can do. All right. This is no joke. I've never seen an escalation like this before. And yesterday, Putin said that he is going to change the laws of war, that he is going to change it so that he has authority and the right for a nuclear attack if he gets attacked by any type of attack at all. He doesn't need a nuclear threat to declare nuclear war on any other country. This is crazy. If Trump was in office, or if we waited until Trump was in office, he would have de-escalated this war. All the other countries that are involved in NATO are literally making this worse and escalating this. Why? Well, that would be the powers to be, the elite. We don't like to use it. We don't like the word government. We don't like the word elite. But there are people calling the shots, and it's not Grandpa Biden. I can tell you that. This is super, super scary. These weapons are no joke. You see those incoming missiles coming down from the cloud cover to the ground was a heartbeat. Fucking scary shit.
In terms of when it actually hits the ground, but Ukrainian sources were suggesting about Mach 11 for a lot of those objects coming in, presumably higher up in the atmosphere. So very, very difficult to intercept, probably impossible, unless you were to go for a system like THAAD or SM-3, but which of course Ukraine doesn't have, and there isn't really credible capability to give them because those are incredibly expensive systems that even the US has a limited number of. So you can't really intercept it, and it's very striking it's an extremely evocative and sort of intimidating thing. But as I say, it's not particularly useful from a conventional strike point of view because the accuracy isn't really there to have the effect without nuclear weapons. It really is a signaling device at this stage. Whereas Russia's use of theater ballistic missiles in terms of short-range systems like the Iskander series, and actually also quite a lot of North Korean short-range ballistic missiles are quite effective because there you're looking at much more accurate systems with a much shorter range that come in somewhat slower, although they're still very difficult to intercept, but that have large unitary or cluster warheads. And so, yeah, I would say that the RS-26 derivation is a different class of system to what we've seen used in Ukraine so far.
So you mentioned
the world changes, and it changes because of the military-industrial complex, and it changes because of the money that's going to Ukraine, and it changes because the outgoing president or whoever the fuck is actually running the country has decided to do something fucking insane.
Okay, so something else I want to point out is that, look, Joe Rogan is not the only one who holds that position. That is an extremely popular position, and a lot of people hold that. Now, the thing is this, I don't think people realize a lot of pro-Ukrainian support, like we should help out Ukraine, NATO should be more involved. A lot of those Americans do not support Donald Trump. So you sort of have this divide where you voted for Donald.
Fired a missile today.
I feel like they fired an intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time ever. It's the first time one of those has ever been used.
That's insanity.
insanity because those intercontinental ballistic missiles can have nukes on them. This one didn't, but if it does, the whole world changes. And it changes because the military-industrial complex, and it changes because the money that's going to Ukraine, and it changes because the outgoing president or whoever the is actually running the country is decided to do something insane.
Yeah.
Insane. And we're all sitting there watching it, and people are cheering it on. CNN was saying, like, finally, see what their headline was about Zelensky about Biden giving Zelensky the ability to use long-range missiles. U.S. made long-range. It's not like nobody knows where they came from. It's not like nobody knows we've been funding this. It's a proxy war. The whole thing is insane. It's insane. Come to the negotiation table. Sit down. Work this out. Stop killing everybody. U.S. allows Ukraine to use long-range missiles. So what did they say? Someone had said that, like, CNN was saying that it was a good thing, which I think is how has the left gone so far crazy that they think it's a good thing to launch missiles?
Just
That's what's scary about life, is like you don't want to pay attention to that. You just want to live your life. You want to just be carefree and have fun and do the thing that you're passionate about. And meanwhile, the world is burning. And
you
just
can't do
hoping
anything about it.
It's
It's like at that high level, it's like there's nothing.
Well, we can. We voted Trump in, and
Yeah,
his idea is to stop all this, and hopefully he can do that.
Yeah.
But, man, it's scary.
I feel like none of the problems between the Ukraine and Russia would have been exacerbated as far as they went had Trump been in office.
I like.
All right, guys, if you're still with me, thank you so much. I know these videos are longer. I feel like, though, I like watching long videos on YouTube. And I feel like from 5, 8, 10-minute videos, you're not really going to get what you need. And I wanted to show you different sources so that you can see it's not just a single bias. It's not just a single report. There's all sorts of different reports, all sorts of different opinions on this. And to get to the truth of any matter, you got to dig deep through all the different sources. That's what I try to do here on Ranting and Raving. I'm not trying to give you any bullshit. I'm not trying to lie to you. I'm not trying to fearmonger. We're going to dig to the truth. If we somehow misrepresent the truth, we're going to go back. We're going to cover it. We're going to apologize. We're going to set it straight. Same with the channels that I follow and I try to get the media coverage from. I know Joe Rogan sometimes just like to throw things out there. But at the same time, he is super smart. And I feel like usually he does resource the things he does talk about, and he does have people on his show who are extremely, extremely knowledgeable. I'm going to cut you to peak prosperity here with Chris. Chris, once again, thank you for doing all your work. Super appreciate it. Everything you do is super professional. Once again, thank you. We need people like you out there. And guys, please be safe. Happy Thanksgiving. Please take care of yourselves.
Nobody is really talking about it here anywhere in the West. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martinson, Peak Prosperity, and I'm here to talk about this, which is this insane drive to nuclear war. Why is it only the blogosphere talking about this, really, right? We see plenty of channels out there talking about it, but really not in the way it needs to be talked about in the center media of really Canada, U.S., most of Europe. Although I think Europe's getting a little ahead of this because, of course, they're in the front lines of the firing zone. I think this is the eerie silence before the war, possibly. And remember, all of this changed when we saw this, which is the launch of the IRBM, the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile. You can see it coming down through the clouds down here. Right, that's six dummy warheads, but not really a dummy because they're coming in with full kinetic energy. 6x6, 36 strikes. We still don't have images from the place it struck, so we've heard that it did some severe damage. Hopefully that woke a few people up. Certainly woke me up. This really caught my attention big time, as it should have. And by the way, this is the Oreshnik missile, which George H. here, I didn't have permission to use his full name, a subscriber at Peak Prosperity said, hey, clever Russians with the name of the hazelnut flowers, those are called catkins. That's the male flower of the hazelnut tree, which, by the way, blooms this time of year here in the Northeast. So you might be able to see those. Doesn't it look like that? That's the hazel. Clever Russians with the name and hazelnut flower looking like warheads. And so that's what we saw come down. Now, this should have changed everything. Now, in the immediate aftermath of that, the New York Times comes out with this. headline here. They've got 4 people on this, some of their deep state mouthpieces and all that other stuff. I don't call them reporters anymore, but they did put something out there that we were supposed to talk about, and I guess they wanted us to know this little piece of news, which is deeply unsettling. First, the headline of this is Trump's vow to end the war could leave Ukraine with few options. Sad face. You know what? I'm a big believer that any country out there needs to stand on its own feet. And if it wants to completely piss off its neighbors, whether that's Israel, whether that's Ukraine, hey, you kind of got to work that out for yourselves. And Ukraine actually had plenty of options to avoid this war beginning in 2013, 2014. Maybe if it hadn't killed 14,000 Russian-speaking people from 2014 to 2022, maybe it could have avoided this war, or maybe it could have taken the peace offering that was on the table there early in 2022 and not listened to Boris Johnson. There are lots of things that Ukraine could have done. You know who left Ukraine with few options? It was them listening to the neocons of the United States, France, and Britain in particular. Okay, so this comes out on November 21st, and it's talking about how 2 years ago, General Mark Milley, then the chief military advisor to President Biden, suggested that neither Russia nor Ukraine could win the war. A negotiated settlement, he argued, was the only route to peace. His remarks caused a furor among senior officials. They're very sprouty faces, very, very mad. But President-elect Donald Trump's win is turning General Milley's prediction into reality. Or, hear me out, reality has turned into reality. It's not, that wasn't a prediction. That was just observing stuff that all of us out here in the non-insane quadrant of the country have been noticing for a long time. If you've been watching New York Times reporters, you could have gone online, looked at these point of view videos that were coming out from all the drone strikes, all the attacks, and found out that warfare has completely changed. It's a completely nasty, brutish thing. Individual personalized death coming from above as people are hunted down by these loitering munitions and also first-person flown videos. Both sides, it's a big deal. We saw this a long time ago. What General Milley was observing was just anything anybody with a set of eyes and a small amount of curiosity could have worked out for themselves years ago. So all of the death and destruction that's happened, all of the Ukrainian men lost since then have just been thrown into a pointless exercise by people like this. But here's where it gets really bad in this article. Down in yellow, quote, several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent. But such a step would be complicated and have serious implications. All right. Everybody, first off, I am so tired of the New York Times getting out there and using their little press pass, hall pass to get unnamed officials to say stuff. Listen, did you guys make this up? Is this a real quote? If they're real people, put a name to it. Can we just be done with this unnamed senior official junk? It's not reporting. I know it feels like you're close to the halls of power and you want to preserve your access to it, but this is crap. These people, they have names, and we need to know who their names are because they are traitors to humanity. These are not good people, okay? That they even suggested this means they should be blacklisted forever from anything that looks like a senior position or the halls of power. In fact, anything beyond dog catcher, probably not. Okay? This is awful that they were even suggesting this because it's clearly obvious what would happen. First off, nuclear weapons taken since the fall of the Soviet Union, those did not belong to Ukraine. They were part of the Soviet Union. Those are actually Soviet weapons. They were actually Russian weapons. So they got taken away, which is a good thing, because if you know anything about Ukraine, you know it's a deeply corrupt, totally nasty country that really shouldn't have nuclear weapons. If there was a candidate country where I'm like, yeah, they probably shouldn't have them, Ukraine would be right at the top of that list for me for all sorts of reasons. Don't have time to go into all of those right now. This is a huge bombshell. That there were people seriously considering this tells you how violently stupid these people are or ungrounded in the realities of the actual world. Of course, these are the same people who would have been surprised in a furor that you would suggest that potentially this war that's unwinnable would be unwinnable because they're not grounded in reality. Unfortunately, Putin is grounded in reality. We showed this at the time when it came out this summer, but here he is talking again. This is the first public statement where he said basically this sentiment.
И поэтому речь идет не о том, чтобы разрешать украинскому режиму наносить удары по России этим оружием или не разрешать. Речь идет о том, чтобы принять решение о том, что страны НАТО напрямую участвуют в военном конфликте или нет. Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их...
There it is. If these long-range weapons, but in particular if nuclear weapons were transferred to NATO, it is known that it would be the considered approach of Russia to say, well, that's the same thing, as if NATO's directly involved. It's meaningless that the United States gives nuclear weapons to Ukraine, who then uses them. It doesn't stop there. Obviously, that's a direct attack on Russia by the United States with nuclear weapons. Time out. How is this not front page news everywhere? Why are you hearing about this from me or from Alex Jones or from Tucker Carlson or from Redacted or from Patrick Bet-David? Why are you not here? This is insane. So that tells me that our mainstream media is still completely co-opted by whatever it was that I hopefully we've started to get a change in, because this deserves a full-throated conversation. All of us. None of this, don't worry your pretty little head, Chris. We got this. We're the experts. Hey, we don't trust experts anymore. They have violated their sacred contract with the people. The elites are just out of touch, and they are now saying crazy stuff like this. Maybe we should just give nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Right? And they lack the context of understanding what they're doing. That's how it appears from out here. And I think that's probably an accurate view at this point in time. So that's why I had to go out and issue an alert about these sorts of things. I issued an alert this past Friday. There it is. You can see that's the thumbnail and that's the title. So what's an alert? An alert I issue at Peak Prosperity to my subscribers when something happens that causes me and Evie to take new direct action to become more prepared. Now, we're pretty prepared, right? We live on a farm. We have we've been at this for years. We have basically, good clean water and food and a community. So we've been doing this a while. We know not everybody's at that place. Many people are just now waking up to the idea of like, oh, these are some real risks. What can we do? What should we do? So I issue alerts very rarely. This might be the fifth one in 15 years of business. I've issued one in October of 2008, right before the banks collapsed. And I said, go get some cash out of the bank, right? I issue them rarely. Why did I do this? So first up, I got a nice critique from a subscriber saying, hey, this here's a very serious alert. It has to be based only on verified information. There are many red lights flashing. We don't need to speculate. It doesn't add anything to the equation, saying, hey, don't be alarmist. I hate being alarmist. It took me many days to figure out that I was even going to send this alert. So I said, quote, this is an excellent point. I take issuing alerts extremely with the utmost seriousness. I had resisted doing so for several days, but the fact pattern had Evie and I activated, which is one of my main criteria for issuing an alert. And the ratcheting provocations became too large to ignore. I had many private conversations behind the scenes with people I trust who had come to the same conclusion. The odds of a major eruption between Russia and the West were serious and too high to ignore. Naturally, I hope for the same thing as everybody, that all this dies down and we look back and wonder if, hey, maybe we were overly alarmed. My frame for such events is to know that nothing is ever determined until it actually happens. Everything is a sea of probabilities and risks before then. So I never wait for 100% confirmation that such a thing is going to happen, because by then it already has happened, which means your chance to prepare is now in the rearview mirror. Remember, when adjusting to a new and large risk, anything you do before it transpires will feel like a complete overreaction. But afterward, when you're looking back on it, you'll realize you actually underreacted. End quote. So that's the tension we're caught in right now, this adjustment reaction. A new, very large risk has just surfaced on the landscape. And a lot of you, I know you're watching this right now going, should I do something? No, that would be crazy. I don't want to be crazy. Should I react? Should I do something? Some of you do some things. You feel like, oh, wow, I'm overreacting here. If this comes to pass and we get into a nuclear war, anything you have done will have been a complete and ridiculous underreaction to actually what you should have done before this happened. So that's the balance. We have to struggle with that adjustment reaction. So looking at that, what were my reasons for issuing this alert on Friday? Well, Putin had said quite clearly that any use of NATO-supplied long-range missiles inside Russia would be considered an attack by NATO on them, putting them at war with NATO directly. So I just showed you that clip. The U.S. then authorized the use of ATACMS missiles deep inside Russia after the election. There was already a referendum mandate election that said, hey, we're going with Trump, whole new guy in town, and this is a lame duck presidency has decided, let's dial this up. Let's do something that Russia has said is a bright red line. This should not happen. I think everybody in the White House needs to be cleared out of power right now, not January 20th, right now, because they are doing something they should not be doing, which is provoking a war in the last few minutes they have left. It's just like they're taking a dump on the bar stool on their way out. I mean, it's just not right, and I'm really mad about it, as you can probably tell. And then Ukraine went ahead and shot those missiles deep into Russia. Russia issued an even more serious sounding warning, which was followed by the UK then authorizing the use of Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which were then used, potentially with lethal effect on Russian and North Korean personnel, which was then followed by Russia using a hypersonic missile for the first time ever in human history as a weapon of war. And thankfully with dummy warheads, but we don't know how much actual damage he did. So that was my data. I said, wow, that's plenty to say this is really serious. The fact that you're not reading about this, hearing about this, that it's not all over the news, that there aren't people who are legitimately pushing the anti-war peace agenda out there on TV and telling people clearly about what we are risking, which is everything. Until you see that, I can tell you that your media, your mainstream media, is severely compromised and is now an enemy of peace, an enemy of people who would like to have reasoned, intelligent, thoughtful, considered conversations. So, with that said, continuing on with that New York Times article, they said here too, but Pentagon officials have expressed confidence that all these shipments of new armaments would be challenging for the Trump administration to suspend aid that had already been approved by Congress and set into motion. So the Pentagon officials have said, we see that there's this new sheriff coming into town. There's a whole new mandate. People have spoken. We better subvert that while we can and do stuff that we think is going to be hard for this new president to undo because we feel like it's important to be done. I didn't vote for that. You didn't vote for that. Nobody voted for that. This is just the military industrial complex of the United States doing what it does, which is just making a lot of money for some contractors as it dials things up and subverting the will of the people who clearly didn't vote for this. And I would suggest strongly voted for the opposite of this. So the Pentagon officials, they're confident that they could basically hamstrung the Trump administration. Yeah, what are you going to do? How are you going to suspend the aid? We've already given it. It's already in motion. Very hard to stop. That deserves a firing right there. Carrying on in green, in another shift this month, the Pentagon said it was lifting a ban on U.S. military contractors deploying to Ukraine to help the country's military maintain and repair U.S.-provided weapon systems, particularly F-16 fighter jets and Patriot air defenses. Hey, that election thing? Tell you what, we're going to lift that. And by the way, they also lifted the ban on using U.S. mines, anti-personnel mines, against Russia. So we'll throw in the mines. We'll throw in, contractors, which is really they're U.S. Might as well be the U.S. military directly. They call them contractors for various reasons, but they're the part of the U.S. military. And so they're here again subverting what they suspect is going to be the will of Donald Trump, who has said quite clearly he's going to come forward and just put an end to this and say, that's it, we're all done. This is not useful enterprise. And it's not, right? You just saw another $7 or $8 billion out the door towards Ukraine compared to nothing for the people of North Carolina who just got hurt in Hurricane Helene, nothing for the people of Lahaina, nothing for the people who are now record homelessness across the country, nothing, because that's not our priorities. Our priorities are this stuff, and this has to change, or we just can't have nice things. Maybe we can have no things if this escalates and gets out of control. The Defense Department here also is soliciting bids for a small number of contractors who would be far from the front lines and would not be fighting Russian forces, to which I would say, Hazel, the Hazel missile just showed that I don't care how far you are from the front lines, there is no far from the front lines anymore. Clue bag. Yeah. And also, Pentagon officials are aiming to award contracts before Mr. Biden leaves office. Quick, through the process, although the process normally takes 4 to 9 months, again, openly subverting what I would say is the will of the electorate. Now, you'd think, oh, okay, well, Chris, I haven't really been hearing more about this. New York Times at least printed some of this. Obviously, they print this because they think this is something that they're authorized to say. So what they're clearly signaling here is, hey, we're talking about ways to ratchet this all the way up to nuclear conflict, and we are going to do everything we can to subvert the will of Trump, which, of course, is the New York Times main thing. That's how that's its identity. It's just trying to, anything Trump is for, they have to be against, even when it's for not having a nuclear war. I swear to God, if Trump comes out and says, I don't want to have a nuclear war, the New York Times will find a way to say, well, then I guess we have to find a way to rationalize having one. That's how deranged they have become. This is mental illness, as far as I can tell. Institutionalized. That's how I experience it, because why wouldn't we build towards peace and prosperity? Why would we build towards uncertain outcomes and potentially ending it all? This is just gross. And I thought we voted against this, but they're not going to go down without a fight, which I told you to be prepared for, because that's the world we live in now. So there are continued escalations in rhetoric. Since I gave you that bullet point list, this just came out today that NATO has announced the possibility of preemptive strikes against Russia. Preemptive. Those would be called first strikes. That's a good way to have a lot of things go pear-shaped very quickly. Quote, NATO is discussing the application of preventive precision strikes. Yeah, that's what they always are. On territory of Russia in the event of an armed conflict with one of the countries of the alliance. This was announced by the head of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer. He noted that the alliance no longer considers itself solely a defensive structure. Well, that means it has an offensive structure. Okay. And he said NATO does not plan to sit and wait for an attack, but is ready to strike the first blow. Hey, what could go wrong? Listen, people, this is deadly serious. This kind of stuff, whether you're not being exposed to it, even though this kind of crazed rhetoric is not showing up on your TV newsfeed, believe me, this is showing up in Moscow. This comes from Pravda, by the way, as you can see in the link down there, which is one of the outlets I have to turn to now to get any sort of news at all. This is news. Could not find this in my own newspapers at the time this came out. As well, in the BBC, just the other day, 2 days ago, we found out that France has authorized the use of Scalp long-range missiles and said, quote, their French foreign minister told the BBC that there are no red lines when it comes to support for Ukraine. No red lines. You mean, it's one of those things, a little winky wink. What they're saying here, let me decode that for you. If they can figure out how to target these Scalp missiles to directly take out Putin, that would be a red line. It is no longer on the table. No red lines. So this is very much a thing that says, hey, we're ready, willing, and able to attack anything and anybody up to, with no red lines, up to Putin himself, which, of course, this is not a very de-escalatory kind of a thing, you might say. This is clearly escalatory. So the escalations of rhetoric have been happening. So since I sent out my alert on Friday, what has happened? Well, France has authorized the Scalp missiles with no red lines. We've seen, it's been revealed that some U.S. officials were in support of handing nukes to Ukraine with delivery systems and targeting, of course. I mean, they're no good if you don't have like the access codes and authorization codes and targeting and a means of getting them there. The Pentagon has lifted a ban on U.S. contractors deploying to Ukraine. We've just found that out. And as well, we found out that the Pentagon has authorized the use of anti-personnel mines in Ukraine. And what did we find out here? NATO has proposed an offensive first strike on Russian targets, potentially. And France and the UK are now also openly talking about sending troops to Ukraine. I mean, France and Great Britain, of course, had such a wonderful time in the last World War and the one before that I guess they're just eager to get back to that. So I'm going to go on to part 2 here with my subscribers. This the eerie silence before the war? I want everybody to be prepared. I got a lot more information and data. This is the amount I can put out here in public for now. If you want to have the most robust conversation about the things that are actually happening in the world, come on by peakprosperity.com.